So let's talk a little ball. Mark, you're down there. You're bopping around to every which way during spring training. But why don't we talk a little bit about the AL East? Because that, from where we are in the Maryland region, there's a lot of action. There's a lot of questions. And maybe we can get to Baltimore here where there is a lot of reports coming out. But so far, you're down in Tampa right now. Let's start with the Yankees. What do we need to know about the Bronx Bombers so far from what you've seen of being down in that region?
Well, there's been a lot of criticism about them all winter about how they didn't make any big moves and they're just trying to run it back with the same team. What I was wondering was, did I miss something or did this team not win 94 games last year and tie for the best record in the American League? People talked about the Yankees all winter like they were a 78 win team that finished fourth. And, frankly, they had one real piece of business they had to take care of this winter, which was bring back Cody Bellinger or find a big bat to replace him, maybe Kyle Tucker, who knows. They brought Bellinger back. It took a while, but they did get him back. And yeah, they're rolling out basically the same team, except that when you think about where they were a year ago, going into the season, you had Luke Weaver and Devin Williams just terrible or certainly inconsistent for the first 2 plus 3 months of the season. Now they're going in. They brought in Bednar. They brought in Duvall. They've got some new arms that they brought into the trade deadline who are now going to be with them for the full season. So I think their bullpen's actually better than it was last year. And by the way, they didn't have Garrett Cole the entire year last year. He's going to be back sometime June-ish. And even if he's not 100% Cy Young Garrett Cole right off the bat, 80% of Garrett Cole is better than most pitchers out there. So I think the Yankees are in good shape heading into the season. That said, this division is a monster, and I think you could make legitimate case for any one of the five teams. Tampa's probably the one you'd have to stretch a little bit, but every time we doubt Tampa, they go out and win 94 games. So, I think I'm sure we'll talk about the Orioles. I like the moves they made. I think they're just due for a bounce back after last year. I don't think they're nearly the team that we saw last year. I don't know if they're the 100-win team we saw before that. But this division's really tough. Toronto is a whole new ball game after what they did last year. Boston brought in some more pitching, and they've had a little bit of a shakeup on their roster, but I think they're going to be dangerous. So this division is going to be, to me, the most fascinating one in baseball to watch.
Yeah, it's a gauntlet. If you survive the AL East and you get to the postseason, you're going to have as good a chance as anybody to make some noise. And you're right. You can never discount Tampa because all they do is just find a way to scratch and claw. And, yeah, they're not going to be favored by anybody by any means, but they ain't going to roll over either. That's not what they've done. That's not what they've done for the last 15 years, which I think, Mark, if I looked back at it, since 2010 going into last season, which would have been 15 years, the Rays had the third or fourth most wins in all of baseball, right? So they find a way. Now, you mentioned Toronto.
By the way, that doesn't include 2008 when they went to the World Series. So we're starting it in 2010. They were in the World Series in 08. So I wonder what that stat is if you start with the year they went to the World Series. But they've got their ace coming back, and McClanahan, he hasn't pitched in 2 years, but he was an all-star 2 years before that in 22 and 23. If he can be healthy and pitch the way we've seen, all of a sudden Tampa's added an all-star caliber, top of the rotation guy. So, yeah, Tampa's tough.
I mean, Zach, we joke about it, right? We're going to look up and Tampa's going to win like 85 games. They're going to be right in it. But Toronto here, because you mentioned them, and Zach then can ask a question about Boston. With Toronto, last year, or 2024, I should say, 74-win team. Then they go from worst to first. They win that 94, have the tiebreaker over the Yankees, and obviously they are 2 outs, a slide away from winning. But Mark, on paper last year, the Blue Jays were good, but they were a bottom third team ERA-wise. They had obviously some good starters, but they were a number one team in batting average. They were elite in comeback victories. They were excellent in situational moments, specifically on offense. They have gotten better, but they did have some subtractions as well. Where do you think then, if we're saying about this contender part with Toronto, are they right there? That's going to be with, say, the Yankees, or is it a place where there's still some unknowns with that ball club because of what's transpired?
Well, I think there are some unknowns. The number one being Okamoto, only because they're counting on him to replace Bo Bichette in that lineup, and we just haven't seen him do it at the big league level. If he can hit in the majors the way he hit in Japan, I don't think the lineup's going to suffer all that much. Their defensive short is going to be better with Jimenez there than it was with Bichette. And I think Toronto realized that as great as their year was and getting to Game 7 of the World Series, they know how tough this division is, and they know that there was not going to be a situation where they could just rest on their laurels and say, "Oh, we'll be back next year." They went out and jumped the market and signed Dylan Cease, and I know Dylan Cease's numbers don't scream ace. But he got $200 million for a reason. It's because he throws 200 innings every year, and they're usually pretty effective innings. So, they lost Bassett, but they've got Cease, they've got Gosman, they've got a good solid rotation. Vladdy, certainly with the contract situation no longer hanging over his head, he looked like he was a little freer last year. With Bichette gone, it's Vladdy's team. There's no question about that. He is the face of this franchise for the next 15 years, basically. And I think, the one thing I've noticed over the years is when a team finally takes that jump, and has that year where they don't necessarily have to win the World Series, but they win the division, they make a long playoff run, they get to the World Series. There's a different confidence about them because they now know what it takes to get back there. And that's one thing that younger teams often struggle with is, it's a long season. It's 162 games. It's 6 months. It's every single day. And now Toronto has seen what it takes to win 94 games, to get through that gauntlet of the playoffs, to get to the World Series. It's an extra month of baseball. And I just think there's a knowledge and sort of a blueprint there for them now, where if they go out there in June and they lose five in a row, there's not going to be the panic that there is among some teams that haven't taken that step. So, do I think Toronto is the favorite in the division? I'd probably still say the Yankees are, assuming that Cole is on track to come back in June or before the All Star break, and they add that ace to their rotation, before the All Star around the All Star break. But like I said, if you told me Toronto, Boston, Baltimore, or the Yankees or Tampa, I guess, are going to win that division, I couldn't really argue with you.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the other side, there is similarities, I could say, with the Red Sox having some young talent. But, Zach, that's not what the Red Sox are making headlines for. What question you got for Mark about Beantown?
Yeah, Mark, so obviously over the winter, the Red Sox, their rotation definitely gets better. You get Sonny Gray, you get Ron Harris Suarez. You bring in Wilson Contreras to play first base, but the big part of the offseason was you're unable to bring back Alex Bregman. In your opinion, how big of a deal and an impact is losing Bregman going to have on this Boston team offensively?
I think the answer to that is going to come in whatever we see from Roman Anthony and Marcelo Mayer. They're young guys who obviously Anthony was number one prospect in the game. Mayer's been was a first round pick and was among the top prospects in the game for a few years. I think if those guys can go out there and produce the way that the Red Sox are hoping that they will, I'm not sure that the offensive absence of Bregman is going to be quite as big a deal. Wilson Contreras will be an upgrade for them. First base was sort of a black hole for them last year. They just kept grasping at straws. Once they lost Tristan Casas, the whole obviously that's what launched the whole Devers trade. He wouldn't play first base, and that was just a spot that they were really struggling with all year. A lot of people thought they were going to be the logical destination for Pete Alonso. He signs a couple 100 miles south in Baltimore. But I thought Boston pivoted well with the Contreras deal. So I think if Anthony stays healthy, we saw what he's capable of doing. That's a big bat in their lineup. To me, the biggest question with the Red Sox is how do they handle the roster? How do they handle this glut of players they have, some of whom don't seem to have a place to play or a place to fit in on the roster? They've got four outfielders, right? Duran, Rafaela, Abreu, and Anthony. Only three of them can play. Okay, so you make the other one the DH. Well, what are you going to do with Casas? Because he can't play first base. That's Contreras' spot. What are you going to do with Yoshida? He has not been as good as they had hoped, but he was pretty good down the stretch last year and showed that he can hit big league pitching. So a lot of players, not enough at bats. Wouldn't stun me if there was a trade in the works at some point this season to try to thin that crop out a little bit. But I just feel like right now there's too many players there, not enough at bats to go around. And so that's going to be a big challenge for Alex Cora.
That will be a challenge. But at least the track record for the Red Sox and with Alex Cora as the manager and what they've done, they were a playoff team last year. Their starting rotation got better. You could argue their starting rotation with the Yankees was probably the most solidified in the division. But there are some questions, and that kind of leads to the final team. And, it's right in the backyard here, Mark. The Orioles made a lot of moves this offseason. They probably checked off every box instead of a for sure ace, but they got Boz, who they think could be an ace. They got a closer in Helsley. They signed Pete Alonso. They trade for Taylor Ward. You can argue the Orioles might have the deepest team that they've had over the years, but that depth is going to be tested, it seems like, early, because Jackson Holliday will miss time. Jordan Westburg, it's unidentified how long he could miss. What's kind of your take? I believe this Orioles team can make some noise in this division because of all the reasons we've just expressed. But what's your takeaway as they're trying to get ready to navigate this with some question marks?
I love their offseason. I think we've been waiting ever since this young core sort of emerged and they had that 100-win season, followed it up with another 90-plus win season. And you were sort of, the Burnes swing was a great one. They didn't replace him last year, and that was what everybody was sort of like, well, why didn't they replace him? You can't expect to lose Corbin Burnes, not bring in another big pitcher, and have that just be okay. They didn't bring in the ace this year, but like you said, Boz has that ability. Chris Bassett just keeps going and keeps winning games. And I think that was a really good addition. They've given themselves a legitimate six-man rotation that I know there's been a lot of talk about, will they use a six-man rotation? My guess is no, because six men are never healthy at the same time. So, they've given themselves an opportunity to be able to deal with an injury if somebody's going to miss a month or 6 weeks, and they have the reinforcements to make up for that. I like the Alonso signing. I think, obviously he's one of the best power hitters in the game, and he's going to a place where I think for the first time in a few years, he probably feels wanted and loved. Where in New York, it was always sort of like, well, he was sort of fighting for his supper in terms of the contracts the last couple of years. And, for the Orioles to go out and give him that deal, I think he feels like he could be a veteran leader on a young team. So I look for good things from the Orioles this year. They're going to have to, like you said, they're going to have to deal with some early season injuries, whether that means Kobe Mayo stepping up and finally realizing his potential, whether that means maybe going out and, signing somebody. I mean, there's not a whole lot left on the free agent market, but there are some big league type players out there. I mean, Jose Iglesias was a 2-win player last year. Ramon Urias was a 2-win player last year. They're still free agents. So I think there are a few players out there who could be sort of patchwork if they need to go out and make a move, if they feel like they don't have the answers internally. But I think after what they did in 23 and 24, everybody there knows that 25 was a disappointment. The front office went out and made some moves to make it clear that last year was not acceptable. And I think that they're going to be in that mix in the AL East as long as their pitching can stay relatively healthy.
What's the chances here for when we hear people go, well, there could be other ways to acquire players in spring training? And all the years for me, I have an opinion on this. But in your mind, you've been covering this game, you've seen it. What's the likelihood of teams making trades and via, that way to acquire talent at this point as camp opens up and as you're getting ready for opening day?
It's rare to see trades early in the spring because you just don't know what your injury situation is going to be. And if you have depth at a spot, you're probably going to hold on to that depth into the middle of March to make sure that your team is healthy as you approach opening day. That said, if there are teams out there, and none are hopping to mind at the moment, but if there are teams out there that have some infielders who are all playing well in spring, and sort of like what I just talked about with Boston with the outfield and the first base and DH situation, if a team has extra players who don't really have a role on that team, they could look to make a trade to fill another hole that they do have on that roster. So if there are trades to be made, you usually see them in the last 3 to 5 days before camps break. and rosters are set. Guys are out of options and they're not going to make the club, something like that, that sort of forces the team's hand and says, well, we're not planning on taking this guy on our opening day roster and we can't send him to the minors. So, you either trade him or you have to designate him for assignment and hope he clears waivers. And if he's a good enough player, he's not going to clear waivers. So I wouldn't expect anything to happen here in the next 3 to 4 weeks, but opening day is what, March 26th, 27th.
Mm-hmm.
So, March 20th, you start looking around at how rosters are shaking out and what teams may have an extra infielder. And it also depends, like you said, on how much time these guys are going to miss. Do they need somebody to patch it together for 4 weeks, or do they need somebody to patch it together for 4 months? That'll be a big factor in sort of what they decide to go out and do.
Yeah, it's a discrepancy, right? It's what do you need? What's the timetable? And still trying to sort that all out, at least in Baltimore, but other teams have to assess that as well with their own rosters. To close it up, Zach, you have one final question for Mark, maybe regarding with things in Baltimore around baseball?
Yeah, Mark, just before you go, and actually kind of talked about it there, as trades, kind of end for the offseason and we head into, the trade deadline is kind of the next deadline that you're like, okay, things will start to pick up again. For you, do you think, because the big thing around Baltimore is, they improved their rotation, added Ryan Helsley, got Kittredge back in the bullpen, but is that going to be enough for a deep enough bullpen to get them through October if they make it there? In your opinion, with the relievers, maybe on the trade market or free agency market still, do you see any movement happening that a reliever could become available maybe towards the opening day or maybe a little after?
It's hard for me to believe you're going to see any quality relievers get moved before opening day. Bullpens are so volatile that you can look at, put it this way, coming into last year, you would have said that the Yankees 1-2 punch of Devin Williams and Luke Weaver may have been the best in baseball, right? Williams was a former Hoffman winner. Weaver was coming off a great season with the Yankees, and it was like, oh, that's a strength of their club. And then both those guys went out and struggled. So you just don't know what relievers are going to look like. So teams who have good relievers, sometimes a lot of times there are young guys in that mix that they can send down, and they play that sort of roster shuffle all year where they're constantly bringing guys up and down. That said, 2 things. Number one, which Helsley are the Orioles getting? Are they getting the guy who's been a lights out closer for the Cardinals for the last few years, or are they getting the guy who got traded to the Mets and couldn't get out of his own way? I would bet on the former. There's been no reason to believe that he's not going to be able to come in and do what he's been doing as the closer. He had to adjust to a new role, pitching in front of Edwin Diaz last year. Maybe that impacted him. Some guys just need that 9th inning pressure to do what they do. The other thing is, we see this every single year, and then this year will be no different. But we don't even have to say maybe. Come trade deadline time, come the last week in July. I can't believe we're talking about the trade deadline on February 18th. But come the last week in July, there are going to be a lot of relievers available because there always are. And when you look at the teams that are not in the race, every team, including teams that are in last place, have relievers that they can trade who are going to bring back prospects and young minor league players who are going to help that organization. The Colorado Rockies were one of the worst teams I've ever seen last year, and they traded 2 of their relievers at the deadline for pretty good returns, right? So I think you will see plenty of relievers, and that's one area where if I go into a season looking at a team and I say, I don't love this team's bullpen, but that's the only thing I don't love, I don't usually worry about it because GMs can address that in July. And if the team is in contention and the GM realizes that the bullpen is an area of need, there's plenty of arms out there to go get. So I don't think we'll see any big moves reliever wise in March, but they will be available and there will be opportunity to improve the bullpen if that's something that they need.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more on that, Mark. To close that out, and this is the part why you say starting pitching depth is more important, is because it's harder to find a really good starting pitcher than it is to go and find a reliever, at least throughout the season. That's why the waiver wire happens. That's why you can have a guy you never heard of who has a great year, because at some point you can stop the bleeding. And when you really need an arm, they're at a premium, and they're at a premium around the deadline time. So we're hopeful. We'll see what happens. But Mark, where can people find all of your work and everything you're doing, especially during spring training?
You can read all my stuff on MLB.com. No real schedule, just sort of wherever I am and what I'm writing, but it's all there. And MLB Network from time to time, not so much in the spring, but certainly when the season gets going. And you can follow me on X at Feinsand.
Perfect. Appreciate you, Mark.
Thanks, guys. Take it easy.